light for you to see to take notes by if you want to take notes. Now, there it is. Yay. Okay, slideshow. It's working. Okay. いいですか? 日本語の動詞. 動詞 is the Japanese word for verb. Okay, so first we're going to talk about ru verbs. Okay, so the examples in this lesson of ru verbs are taberu, neru, miru, okiru, right? Everybody remember what they mean? What's taberu? Neru, miru, okiru,
Just get up.
to get up, to wake up. Hi. Okay. Does anybody remember what the rule is for ru verbs?
Drop the ru and add mas.
Yes, drop the ru and add mas. There you go. Okay, so does anybody remember what the difference is between taberu and tabemasu? Why do you need both?
Isn't one just the dictionary definition?
Okay, one is the dictionary form, which is
The root.
the ru ending, right? So taberu is the dictionary form, which means that if you look up the verb to eat in a dictionary, what form is it going to show you?
Root.
Taberu, right? If you look up to eat in an English to Japanese dictionary, the word they're going to give you is taberu. It's not going to show you tabemasu. A conjugation chart will show you taberu, tabemasu, and tabemasen. But a plain old dictionary won't. It's just going to show you taberu and expect you to know how to conjugate it for yourself. Okay? What about tabemasu?
Means eating, right?
It means to eat, and it means that you're either
Going to
doing it in the near future, or you're going to do it, or you do it habitually. So it's like the simple present tense in English or the simple future tense in English. So when it's simple present tense, that means, for example, I eat. He eats, she eats, they eat, right? In Japanese, that's tabemasu, 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 tabemasu. You don't even need the pronouns, necessarily. Okay? Notice that in English, it changes sometimes depending on whether the pronoun is singular or plural. Japanese doesn't change for that. Okay? There's no difference between I eat and he eats, or they eat, or we eat, or she eats. You know, English changes for some of the pronouns, right? Japanese doesn't. It's always tabemasu. What about tabemasen? What's that one mean?
You don't eat.
To not eat. So tabemasen would mean like I don't eat or I will not eat. Tabemasu is I eat or I will eat, or he will eat or they will eat, or whatever, right? Okay, and of course you can add a pronoun or a person's name if you want to. You don't have to. Okay? Watashi wa tabemasu. I eat. But it's not necessary if the context already made it clear that you're talking about yourself. Okay? Same thing for all the other verbs. Okay? So neru, nemasu, miru, mimasu, okiru, okimasu. Okay? Any questions about ru verbs? Those are pretty straightforward, right? Okay. Now it gets fun. Ubabu. Okay, so we've got examples including iku, which means to go. Nomu, to drink. Yomu, to read. Hanasu, to speak. Kiku, to listen. Kaeru, to return. Okay, as in to go home. Okay, kaeru is specifically used for returning to a place where you belong, a place where you live. Okay. So these u verbs are sometimes also known as godan verbs, Okay, why godan? How many columns do you see here? Ka, ki, ku, ke, ko. How many is that?
5.
5. What's the Japanese word for 5?
Go.
Go. Okay, and dan just means levels or rows. And this is written the English style way, horizontally, but if you do it the Japanese traditional way, the dan is a vertical line. Ka, ki, ku, ke, ko, done vertically, right? So each one of these that share a consonant, each consonant group is called a dan in Japanese. Okay, so we've got kadan, sadan, tadan, nadan, hadan, madan, dadan listed here. I didn't list all of them just for the sake of having the print larger so you guys can read it easily. But notice what's in purple here.
Ku.
Ku, su, su, nu, hu, mu, ru. Do you notice anything about these?
U and in u.
They all end in u, and all of the u verbs end in
U.
u, right? Okay, that's why they call them u verbs in our book. Other books sometimes call them godan verbs because when you conjugate them, eventually they will use all 5 of these pronunciations in their conjugation. So for example, iku is in the purple row for the dictionary form, right? The dictionary forms are always going to be in this purple row. Ikimasu, ikimasen, both conjugate in this turquoise row, right? Later, we will learn other forms that do ika, something, like ikanai. We'll learn ike, ikeru, things like that, and iko, things like that. So eventually, you will use all 5 of those, which is why they call them godan verbs. Okay? But for now, we're only working with these 2 columns, ku and ki. So if you're working with iku, ikimasu, nomu, nomimasu, yomu, yomimasu, hanasu, hanashimasu, kiku, kikimasu, kaeru, kaerimasu. Does that make sense? Does the color coding help you see it a little bit better, what's actually happening here?
Yes.
Okay. And then we have irregular verbs. Kuru, kimasu, suru, shimasu. Notice that there's no particular pattern for these. Right at the moment, you could look at it and say, well, it drops the ru like all the ru verbs do, and it changes the thing before the ru from u to i, right? Ku to ki, mas, su to shi, mas. So there's a little bit of a pattern there, but as we go further with other conjugations in later chapters, kuru and suru don't even always conjugate like one another. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So that's why they're considered irregular. Now here's the good news. These are the only 2 irregular verbs in the whole language. Any other irregulars that you might list are actually compounds that end with either kuru or suru. So for example, they teach you benkyou suru in this chapter. That's really a combination of a noun, benkyou, and the verb suru tacked on the end to turn it into a verb. Okay? That's all that is. They took basically a Chinese phrase that gets treated as a noun in Japanese and tacked suru onto the end of it so they could make it a verb. Okay? Because you can't conjugate Chinese verbs as is because Chinese verbs don't conjugate at all. So, so they had to come up with something. So this is what they came up with. Okay? So that is Japanese verbs in a nutshell. We've got ru verbs, ru, drop the ru, add mas. We've got u verbs, change the u to i, and then add mas. And then we've got our 2 irregulars, which don't follow much of a pattern, but there are only 2 of them, so you can memorize them, right? The only other thing to be wary of is we've got ru verbs, which drop the ru and add mas, right? And then we've also got u verbs that happen to end in ru, right? But they're not ru verbs. They just happen to end in ru because ru is in that u column. So it's possible, right? So you just have to be aware of those. And my suggestion is that whenever you're memorizing any new verb vocabulary, that you make note of whether it's an u or a ru verb at that moment and memorize the pair. Taberu, tabemasu. Kaeru, kaerimasu. Okiru, okimasu. If you memorize the pair of them and you get that in your ear so thoroughly that the correct one sounds right and you connect it to its meaning, then you won't have a problem knowing which one's which. Later on, we will actually encounter a few verbs where there's an u verb version of that dictionary form and a ru verb version of that dictionary form. So it conjugates both ways. There aren't very many of those, thank goodness. But there are a few, and they're entirely different meanings from one another. So that's another reason why it's really important to learn the pair as a set. Okay? And in lesson 6, we're going to learn one more conjugation that adds a third piece that's sort of the trifecta. If you've got those 3, you can conjugate almost anything else without too much trouble, because those 3 give you the basic rules that everything else work off of. Okay.
So that's not a ru verb, that's
Right.
an u verb.
Exactly.
How do you tell like what is an u verb or a ru verb?
Because of the way it changes. That's why I'm saying you have to memorize these as a set, because if you don't know how it changes, you don't know which category it falls in.
Okay.
Your textbook labels them for you. They categorize them in every
so you just
lesson.
need to make sure if it ends
So
in
make
that it
sure
is a
when
ru
you're
verb.
studying them, when you're learning them, make sure you pay attention that first time it's introduced. Oh, this one's in the ru verb set. This one's in the u verb set. And then memorize the pairing. So what you might want to do is, when you're in the vocabulary list, look at it with me. You will see they list u verbs. Iku, kairu, kiku, nomu, hanasu, yomu, right? And then they list ru verbs. Okiru, taberu, neru, miru, right? Every lesson in this textbook that introduces verbs will do that. They're going to categorize them by verb type for you. So when you're doing that, when you're learning them, what I would do is right here in the vocab list, right there next to the dictionary form, I would write out the mas form also, right there, so that you always have the pair. And when you're making flashcards, I would make sure that both forms are on your flashcards. Not necessarily front and back, because you might also want the English meaning on there somewhere. But what I like to do is what I call 3-way or 4-way flashcards, which means that, if this is my flashcard, maybe I write kiku in this corner, and I write kikimasu in this corner, and then I write to listen on the back, so that if I'm quizzing myself on how to say it in Japanese, I can look at the verb to listen in English and say, okay, kiku, kikimasu, check myself on both, right? Mm-hmm. If I want to look at kiku and try to remember how to conjugate it and what it means, I can cover up the part that says kikimasu with a thumb, because I wrote it small enough on a 3x5 card. And then I can just be looking at kiku and then quiz myself on, okay, kiku changes to kikimasu because it's an u verb, and it means to listen. See what I'm saying? So you can use multiple pieces of your flashcards to quiz yourself on multiple things. I would even say maybe put the dictionary, the the dictionary form, the Moss form, and maybe even the category, whether it's an U verb or a do verb or an irregular in another corner, and leave a corner blank for when we learn the kanji for it.
How would you cover them up though? Like you would see all of them in one.
When you're flipping it over, try to only look at the one corner, cover the rest of it with your hand.
Oh,
You're not
okay.
going to make flashcards that are this big,
Yeah.
right? You make little ones.
So just like
So
be
you're
aware
putting
and-
the
yeah.
rest of it with your, if you are consistent and you always put the dictionary form in the upper right corner and the Moss form in the upper left corner and the verb category in the lower right corner or something like that, then you'll know which one to leave open and what other parts to cover with your hand as you're flipping through them. Right? Right.
So that last one is a U verb.
Yes.
Even though
It ends in ru.
it's
Yes.
okay.
That's why I
So
wanted
is
to
it
talk
like a
about
special
that.
case?
Yeah, it is a special case. There are probably a couple dozen ru verbs. A couple dozen u verbs that end in ru in the whole language. There aren't that many of them. So if you memorize the ones that there are as you get to them, then you'll know which one's which. You know, if somebody asks me on the spot, hey, which one is kairu? I don't immediately think, oh, it's an U verb. I think kairu kairimasu. Oh yeah, it's an U verb. The way I know which one it is by doing the conjugation in my head, because I've paired them so thoroughly together that I know that kairu kairimasu sounds right and kairu kaemasu sounds wrong. Okay? So, and that's just a matter of practicing it and memorizing it and getting good with it. Okay? Do you feel like it makes sense to you now? Okay? Better? Okay. So what I thought we could do for further practice is actually make use of some class time to do some of these conjugations orally, where I say, for example, nomu, and you guys all yell back, nomimasu, okay? Can we try that? Just, like a choral practice thing, okay? So I'm actually going to use exercise A that you did in your homework. So, but try to do it just looking at the book, but not necessarily looking at the answers you wrote down. See if you can remember how to do them without looking at it all. Okay, so taberu, nomu, kiku, miru, suru, はい、話す、はい、行く、来る、来ます、帰る、帰ります、寝る、寝ます、読む、起きる、勉強する。Okay, I heard like one or two voices on most of those, so let's try it a different way. We're going to practice. I say it, you say it, I say it, you say it, for both the dictionary form and the Moss form as a pair first. And then, after we've repeated it a few times, then we'll try it the way we just tried it, okay? Because people aren't ready yet. So when I say it after me, and then I'll say the next piece, okay? So, taberu, tabemasu, nomu, nomimasu, kiku, 聞きます。見る。見ます。する。します。話す。話します。行く。行きます。来る。来ます。帰る。帰ります。寝る。寝ます。読む。読みます。起きる。起きます。勉強する。勉強します。Getting a little better? Okay. Some people said no. Okay, we'll try it again, the same way. Okay, we'll try to get a little bit faster. Okay, and really say it loud. So you're getting the, you may not realize this, but when you say it out loud, you're not only getting the benefit of practicing it by saying it, you're also getting the benefit of hearing it and the muscle memory from your muscles making that motion and making that sound. So you're getting it 3 ways. And if you're following along reading it in the book at the same time, then you're getting it a 4th way, visually. The more different senses you can engage.
Are you just reading it right now?
Yeah, I'm reading straight from here. I'm going down the list. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So you ready? 食べる 食べます 飲む 飲みます 聞く 聞きます 見る 見ます する します 話す 話します 行く 行きます 来る 来ます 帰る 帰ります 寝る 寝ます 読む 読みます 起きる 起きます 勉強する 勉強します Okay, now let's try where I say both and then you say both after me. Okay, so say the pair. 食べる 食べます 飲む 飲みます 聞く 聞きます 見る 見ます する します 話す 話します 行く 行きます 来る 来ます 帰る 帰ります 寝る 寝ます 読む 読みます 起きる 起きます 勉強する 勉強します はい Feeling a little bit more comfortable? Maybe? A little bit? ちょっとOkay. So let's try that again like that, where we say both. Okay? You ready? And actually this time, let's try saying the same thing 3 times in a row before we move on to the next one. So, 食べる 食べます 食べる 食べます 食べる 食べます That should really make it drive home. Try it? Okay. So, you ready? 食べる 食べます食べる 食べます食べる 食べます Like that. So, I'm going to just do 1, 2, 3 with my fingers. Okay? Ready? 食べる 食べます飲む 飲みます聞く 聞きますはい見る 見ますはいする しますはい話す 話しますはい行く 行きます来る 来ますはい帰る 帰りますはい寝る 寝ますはい来る 来ます Oh, my eye skipped to the wrong one. Okay. 読む 読みます起きる 起きます勉強する 勉強しますHi. Getting better? You sound better. I'm hearing more voices. I'm hearing more people participating. Does it feel like you're starting to get the hang of how they work and you might actually remember some of them tomorrow?
It feels like we're being brainwashed.
But in a good way, right? But if you think about how babies learn language, they hear the same thing a zillion times before they even say their first words, right? And if you've ever been around a 2-year-old, they say the same thing 10 times in a row on a fairly regular basis. Mommy, 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 mommy. you know, all the time, all day long. That's what we're reproducing here, right?
So the Moss form is like the actual form we would use for saying that we are going to eat.
Yes, yeah, so if you're saying, I will eat,
You
tabemasu,
said
okay? Now, the other piece to understand about this is the dictionary form. Next semester, we're going to find out that you can actually use the dictionary form for casual speech, as well as certain constructions, certain grammar structures that take the dictionary form plus something to produce some other end product. Okay, so if you want to say, I like to eat sushi, the like to eat part requires the dictionary form of eat, taberu. Okay, so, but that's a later thing. That's actually what my level 2 class is working on right now. They just did that. But that's another reason that you need the dictionary form. It's not just to use a dictionary. If that was the only thing you needed it for, it would be obsolete now, because you can go online and type in any form of the verb you want and get a definition from an online dictionary, right? So the fact that you needed it for a paper dictionary isn't a good enough reason to learn it. But the fact that you need it for talking to your best friend in Japanese, because if you continue to use tabemasu and tabemasen with your best friend, they're going to think you're giving them the brush off. Okay? The mas forms of the verbs are actually called neutral polite, which means they're perfect for talking to strangers. They're perfect for asking for help in the subway station. They're perfect for asking the store clerk where the bathrooms are. You know, des mas forms are that level. They're also good for when you first meet somebody that will eventually become a friend, but you don't know them that well yet. And over time, this person that you just met because you just arrived in Japan yesterday, as you become closer friends with those people, you'll start to use the mas endings less and the dictionary form and short form endings more. And it's a gradual progression. Within, say, a host family, you might make that progression very quickly. You might start using short forms, you know, a couple weeks in. With Japanese friends that you work with or study in class with or, you know, see occasionally, it's a more gradual progression. But it's a very important aspect of the culture to use the right level of politeness for the right situation. So that's the other really important thing about dictionary form. Okay? So like I said, they're basically, it's really three things. Looking stuff up in a dictionary, certain grammar structures that require dictionary form to create structure, and using polite speech versus casual speech. Okay? So, okay, there was a question earlier also about iku versus kuru. And I also want to talk about kaeru. Okay, so kaeru, kaerimasu, is specifically for returning home. Like I said before, returning to a place you belong. You would not use it for, say, I was in school and I went home and then I went back to school. Returning to campus, you would not use kaeru because you don't live on campus. You don't have your bed here. You know, you don't pay rent here. You live someplace off campus somewhere, right? But if you lived in a dorm, you could use kaeru to return to the dorm. If you're living in a house or an apartment, you use kaeru to say that you're going back to your house or apartment. If you're living overseas, you could use kaeru to say that you're coming back to America. If you're living in New York, but your hometown is in Melbourne, you could use kaeru to say that you're coming back to Florida or coming back to Melbourne. Okay, but you wouldn't use kaeru to say, I'm going back to Publix again because I left my wallet there. Okay? Make sense? So that's kairu, kaerimasu. Iku and kuru are used slightly differently from their English equivalents in certain idiomatic situations. So, for example, let's say you live in a 2-story house. You're upstairs. Your mom is downstairs. She just cooked dinner. She's calling you to say, it's time to come eat dinner. She'll say, come eat dinner, and you'll say, okay, I'm coming, right? In Japanese, she would say, kite kudasai, please come. She would use a form of kimasu for come to me. You would say, hai, ikimasu. You would not use kimasu there. You would use ikimasu because you are starting from a point where you physically are present and moving toward something else. So you would use ikimasu. But she's staying where she is and telling you to come to her. So she would use kimasu. That's the difference. Does that make sense? Okay, did I lose anybody there? Okay. Okay, so that's like a real life example. I remember that happening in my host family the first time I was in Japan. I was like, oh, that's how that works. Okay? So, okay, so and then do we need to talk more specifically about the ma-sen forms? Does anybody have questions about tabemasen, nomimasen, ikimasen, shimasen?
I have a question about kiru. So I get iku would be like you're going, like I'm going somewhere. But what would be like an example of kuru?
Kuru. So for example, let's say you're on campus and you're talking to your friend on the phone who's somewhere off campus. And you're telling them about something happening on campus, and they decide they want to come to campus for that event. They would say, kimasu. Ima kimasu. I'm coming now. Okay? Because they're off campus somewhere. No, I'm sorry. No, they would say, ima ikimasu. They would say, I'm going. If you were inviting them, you would be using kimasu to say, come to this. Or,
so kimasu is like if you want someone to come to you.
Right.
Kimasu
Yeah,
is like
so,
you're going to someone
right.
else. Like,
So like let's say you're asking your friend, hey, are you coming to this thing? You're at the party and you're asking your friend, are you coming to the party? Kimasu ka? Are you coming? And your friend says, hai, ikimasu. Yes, I'm going.
okay, I see.
Okay, that's the way it works in Japanese. So even when you're doing your homework, your workbook exercises, if you're talking about someone coming to the place where you currently are, you're going to need to use kimasu. If you're talking about moving from where you currently are to some other location, you're going to use ikimasu. Unless you're talking about moving from wherever you are to return to your own home, in which case you have to use kaerimasu. That's the only exception to that. You don't use ikimasu to go to your own house. You use kaerimasu to go to your own house.
So even if you are returning to somewhere that's not your home, you would still use ikimasu?
Right.
So
Yeah. So like if you are visiting your friend's house and then you're going someplace for a little while and then you're planning to go back to your friend's house again, you would use ikimasu to talk about going to your friend's house again, or another verb that they're not introducing yet, which means to return but not to a place that you belong. Okay, so there is a fourth direction of movement verb. Okay, but I want to make sure we get to some particles next. Is everybody ready for particles? That's what you were about to ask about? Okay, so that's a good segue into particles, because the first particles we need to talk about deal with objects of verbs and locations for movement. Okay, so remember we were talking about tabemasu before. If you are going to talk about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, you need the particle o. Remember we learned the hiragana wo symbol, the one that's in the wa, o column, but we haven't used it for much yet, right? It's just kind of been sitting there in the chart being ignored. Now we get to use it. That o, the one that's in the wa column, is an object marker. And the good news is object starts with o, and it's pronounced o. Cool, right? So it helps us remember it. Okay, that's just a helpful coincidence, right? Okay, so for example, kohi o nomimasu. What did I just say?
I'm drinking coffee.
I will drink coffee, or I drink coffee habitually. It's not the ing form. We're actually going to learn an ing form later. Okay, so it's not I'm drinking, it's I drink coffee, like I'm not averse to it, I'm not allergic to it, I'm willing to drink it, or I will drink it, as in I'm planning to. Okay? Okay, so what about like sushi? Sushi o tabemasu. I will eat sushi, or I eat sushi, right? Some people don't like sushi, so they could say sushi o tabemasen. I don't eat sushi. Okay? Kohi o nomimasen. I don't drink coffee. Right? Okay? You can do the same thing with other verbs that they're introducing, such as ongaku o kikimasu. I listen to music. Right? Right.
Wo or o always marks the object receiving the verb action.
Yes. Yes, it always marks the object receiving the verb's action. Exactly right. Okay, so it's a direct object. Okay. Terebi o mimasu. That's another example. Terebi o mimasu. Okay. Question?
So by object, what do you mean exactly? Like when you say the word object, 'cause
Okay.
when I think object, I think of like a literal object.
Well, it very often could be, but not always a physical one in this. Object in the grammar sense in English is usually at the end of the sentence.
Okay.
So like, I like dogs. Dogs is the object of that sentence. Okay, I eat sushi. Sushi's the object. Okay? English is known as a subject-verb-object language because we always put the subject at the beginning, the verb in the middle, and the object at the end. Japanese is not a subject-verb-object language. Some people call it a subject-object-verb language because you can put the subject first, then the object, then the verb. The only hitch is the subject and the object aren't mandatory. Tabemasu by itself is a complete sentence. Grammatically speaking, it's possible for that to be a correct sentence. Okay, you don't have to always have an object. Hey.
So you're saying that you have, when it goes subject, like if you're saying I drink coffee, that would be watashi wa coffee.
Kohi o
Kohi o
nomimasu.
nomimasu.
Hey,
But
watashi
you don't
wa
have to say
ko.
all that, or say
You don't
I
have
drink?
to. Watashi wa kohi o nomimasu is very specific. If the person you're speaking with already knows that you're talking about yourself, you could just say kohi o nomimasu. If the person has just offered you coffee, kohi o nomimasu ka? Will you drink coffee? You can say hai nomimasu.
Okay, so just to clarify one more time,
Hai.
the sentence kohi onomimasu, that would mean like the subject is implied, so you don't need
Yeah.
it. So in that case, it's just the object and then the verb.
Right.
Okay.
So it's somebody drinks coffee.
Okay.
We don't know who unless the context already told us. But when you're translating kohi o nomimasu, most people just pick a pronoun and go with that as their default. Okay, so like I drink coffee, he drinks coffee, whatever you pick. And they just, in the setting of like a test or something where there are going to be lots of sentences, kohi o nomimasu, otsu o nomimasen, sushi o tabemasu, natto o tabemasen, people will just pick a pronoun and use that consistently just so that they don't have to keep writing out somebody, we don't know who, says this. Yeah,
So could you say that the object is what's being acted on?
exactly. That's what
Okay.
an object is.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. So any action verb that acts directly on a thing is going to be that thing o and that verb. Notice that the verbs that involve travel do not work with o, okay? You can use nomimasu, yomimasu, hanashimasu, kikimasu with o. You cannot use ikimasu, ikimasu, or kaerimasu with o. They don't work, okay? So you can say, for example, ongaku o kikimasu. I listen to music. Nihongo o hanashimasu. I speak Japanese, right? Language. Hon o yomimasu. I read a book, right? Mizu o nomimasu. I drink water. Okay? The next one, de, can give you a location where something is happening. Notice this is not travel to or from that location. This is being in that location and doing some action. So, for example, toshokan de hon o yomimasu. Read a book at the library, right? So the de is going to mark a location where some kind of activity is taking place, okay? So, toshokan de hon o yomimasu, or restaurant de sushi o tabemasu. Ie de sake o nomimasu.
Just for places.
Yeah, so those are different places. Restaurant, can everybody guess? Restaurant, yes. Ie was one of your vocabulary words. It means house.
So we would only use that in a situation with a place and a verb?
Right, it's going to be a place and an action verb, something you do. It's not going to be with a passive verb.
Okay.
Okay, it's going to be with something active. Eating, drinking, sleeping, these are considered active verbs. So, for example, with nemasu, uchi de nemasu, sleep in the house. Okay, or something like that. Okimasu doesn't usually get used with a place. Okimasu doesn't usually get used with de. It can get used with time, which brings us to a different
That's to go
particle.
home, right?
Okimasu no is to get up, to wake up.
Oh.
So, for example, if you want to talk about what time you're going to do something, you can say, for example, 6時に起きます. I will wake up at 6 a.m. Right, 6 o'clock. 午前6時に起きます. I'll wake up at 6 o'clock a.m. Okay? Or you could say something like 10時に寝ます. I'll sleep at 10 o'clock. Okay? So you can use time phrases with ni to indicate when a certain action is going to happen. Okay? If you're planning to go to a place, you're going to use ni in a different sense or at. So let's say you're going to a party. Party ni ikimasu. Yes, that's the real word. Okay? If you're going to your friend's house, tomodachi no ie ni ikimasu. Or tomodachi no ie e ikimasu. What's the difference between et and ni? Aside from the pronunciation and the fact that et is written as a het but pronounced et, which is it's the only other character besides wa getting pronounced wa, even though you write ha for that particle. Those are the only two that the hiragana gets pronounced differently when it's a particle. The rest of the time it gets pronounced another way. All the other hiragana are totally consistent. They're always pronounced the same. Yay! Okay. It's pretty good, right? For a whole language to only have two characters that sometimes shift. So e is used when you're going to a place that is physically located in one spot, it can't move, versus ni, which can also be used to go to that physical place, but it can also be used to go to an event. So let's say your friend is having a party at their house. You could say, tomodachi no ie ni ikimasu, Or tomodachi no ie e ikimasu. You could say either one of those because their house is a physical location, right? But if you're saying that you're going to the party, party ni ikimasu, you would not use e in that case because the party, although it's planned to be at that friend's house, there's always the possibility that it could move to some other location because it's a party, right? It's not embedded in their house. It could be anywhere. She just decided to have it at her house. Make sense? Hey.
With the particle ni, you said you could use it with time.
Yeah.
And I was looking at one of the examples, and it actually had the time in the sentence and it didn't have ni. And I asked Toshi about it. He said you don't always have to use ni.
Right, and there are actually specific rules about when to use ni and when not to use ni that most native speakers couldn't articulate for you if you asked. So that's why he
was
didn't.
Like thinking about it. He was
Yeah.
like, that sounds right. I don't know.
Yeah, typical answer from a native speaker. The rule is if it's a specific time, something that you can mark on a clock or a calendar, you need ni.
Okay.
If it's relative time, something that shifts depending on when you say it, you don't put ni. So for example, ashita means tomorrow. If I say ashita now, I mean Thursday, right? If I say ashita on Thursday, I mean Friday. That's what they mean by relative time. The meaning of ashita points at a different day depending on when you say it. Any phrase that's like that does not take ni. Make sense?
What does it use then if it doesn't use ni?
It doesn't use anything normally.
Okay.
Just a comma or a space. Okay? Sometimes it can take the particle wa, but only if you're making that the topic of your sentence. Like, tomorrow I'm going to do this. If that's the emphasis in your sentence, that you're going to do it tomorrow
like
or not some
ashita
other
wa.
time, then you can say, ashita wa sushi o tabemasu. Tomorrow I'm going to eat sushi. I didn't get to do it today, I wanted to, so tomorrow I'm definitely going to eat it. Okay? Hi.
So for me, it's like, as far as the event goes, it can be something that's like not always there, like a party or like a music festival or like
Right.
something that isn't embedded into the place you're going to.
Right, yeah.
Like
so
a concept
like,
of something
yeah, a
that's happening.
concert or something.
Yeah.
Konsato ni ikimasu.
Okay.
You know, the concert might be at the King Center,
Right.
and then at the last minute they might change and say, no, it's going to be at Melbourne Auditorium. You know, so, but you can still say konsato ni ikimasu. But Kingu Center e ikimasu works.
But you can still use ni in that sense.
You could use ni. Ni and e are interchangeable when it's a physical location like that.
Mm-hmm.
When it's an event, only ni works. E doesn't work anymore.
Is there a reason why that it exists if ni can go for both?
I would assume that at some point in history there was a reason they needed both, and
Okay, so
maybe
like-
the language has just changed so much that it's changed how it's used.
Maybe one was more polite or something.
I don't know that it's necessarily more polite, but I think for our purposes, native speakers use them both, so you need to understand them at least. If you're struggling to know whether or not it's okay to use e in a particular sentence, but you're sure that ni will work, use ni. It doesn't hurt anything to just use ni. But you need to at least comprehend e when it's heard in context by a native speaker, because native speakers are not going to worry about the fact that, well, this gaijin might not have learned e properly. You know. Okay. So, you know, and a lot of Japanese people, like you discovered, Nick, can't explain the difference
Yeah.
between ni and e. They have no clue how to explain it. They just know which one sounds right. Yeah. And then the other piece of this is that, you know, ni having two different uses like this, you could kind of think of it as two different particles that happen to sound alike. It's probably safer to think of ni meaning to and ni meaning at a certain time are just two separate particles that happen to be homophones, because they're completely different functions, right? 10時に学校に行きます. At 10 o'clock, I'll go to the school. two completely different uses of ni, right? And it is possible to use them both in the same sentence. Now, if you're going to have two different time expressions in the same sentence, let's say you want to say, 土曜日2時に図書館に行きます. You can just do 土曜日, comma, and then the time phrase 2時に, or you can say 土曜日の2時に. So Saturdays, 2 o'clock, as opposed to some other days, 2 o'clock. Sounds weird in English, but it works in Japanese. Or you could make the day your subject and say 土曜日は2時に図書館に行きます. On Saturday, I'll go to the library at 2.
Anyone's acceptable?
Any one of those three is acceptable. You wouldn't normally put the ni there again. So 土曜日に2時に図書館に行きます. That's one ni too many. Okay, but you can do 土曜日2時に行きます or 土曜日の2時に行きます. Okay, for going at 2 o'clock. Make sense? Okay. Okay, so in the time reference section, they do refer to the fact that relative time words like ashita don't take ni. Also, words that express habitual actions like mainichi, maeban, that's like every day and every evening. Those phrases don't take ni. And one other one that doesn't take ni is itsu, the question word, when. That one does not take ni either. Okay? But other time phrases like nanji desu ka, what time is it? But nanji ni ikimasu ka, what time will you go? That takes the particle ni, the time phrase ni. Nanji ni sushi o tabemasu ka, what time will you eat sushi? You can ask what time, and because that is a specific thing, it takes ni. Okay? Does everybody get masenka? Masenka is basically just, won't you please? It's a very polite invitation to do something. Tabemasen ka? Won't you eat this? It's a very polite way of inviting someone to do something, and you won't be offended if they choose to say no. Okay?
So it's kind of like asking in the negative. Do you answer it in the positive or in the negative?
You can. You tabemasen ka? You can answer hai tabemasen. You can do that.
Okay.
And that's one reason it's more polite, because Japanese people don't like to say iie because they feel uncomfortable telling people no about almost anything. So, sushi o tabemasen ka? Won't you eat some sushi? You can say, hai tabemasen. To say, yes, I won't. Sounds ridiculous in English, but it works in Japanese.
So yes, I won't. So it means I won't, or
It means I won't.
Okay.
Yeah. Tabemasen ka? Hai, tabemasen. Yes, I won't eat it. Yes, you're correct in thinking that I won't eat it. So Dylan had a question, and then Danny.
I just figured it out.
Okay.
But actually, I had another.
Okay.
So basically, I just put A is for going to places that's physically located and does not move, like
Exactly.
a location, and then ni a particle for specific time and or a non-permanent location.
Right. And it can also work for the places that would use e also.
So
Okay.
anything that can use A can use ni.
Right, but the reverse is not true. And Danny had a question also?
So if you were in Japan and you said iya to say no, would they get offended?
No, it's not that you can't ever use it. It's just that Japanese people prefer to give a less direct answer, especially if the answer is no, or if the answer is I don't like that, or that's not my thing. Any kind of negative answer, any kind of answer where they're disagreeing with you or expressing an opinion different from yours, they tend to be more roundabout and less explicit than we would be. You know, this was a big problem in the 70s when American companies started doing a lot of business in Japan, and they didn't know about this cultural difference yet. And people would, you know, do a presentation to a Japanese company. The Japanese people would say, "Oh, very interesting. We will think about it. We'll let you know." And never answer, never call them back. And the Americans didn't understand that that was actually Japanese speak for "no way, Jose." Very interesting is code for not in a million years. But it took about a decade, I think, for American business people to figure that one out. They had a lot of rejected proposals that they didn't know were rejected. So that's just a cultural difference, you know. And you will also find that if you really don't want something, you will probably have to say no more than once to convince the person that you're not just being polite. If they're asking you, "Won't you have another cookie?" and you're really stuffed and you don't want any more cookies, you're going to have to say "Kekko desu" more than once, most likely, because they're going to keep trying to get you to eat another cookie until they're sure that you're not just being polite by saying no, that you really don't want more.
So should you say no first if you want to be polite?
Well, the phrase that they would use for that kind of situation is "Kekko desu," I'm fine. You know, but you know, they're very likely to not be sure if you really mean that you're fine, so they'll offer at least one more time usually.
Do you also say "daijoubu"?
That's more like the answer when you trip and fall and somebody asks, "Are you hurt?" and you say "daijoubu desu," I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of "I'm fine."
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. Okay.
Other one's like "no, thank you."
Yeah,
I'm fine.
"Kekko desu" is "I'm fine, I don't need anything else." "Daijoubu desu" is more like "I didn't hurt myself when I just tripped and fell."
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so word order, basically what they're saying with word order is just that anytime you have the words correctly paired with their particles, the whole unit, noun plus particle, or whatever it is, that unit can move around within the sentence fairly freely. The verb pretty much always stays at the end, although there are exceptions even to that. But any piece, you know, if you want to say, "Watashi wa sushi o tabemasen," I don't eat sushi, you can move some of the parts around. Any part, like, you wouldn't normally move those two, but something like, "2時にsushi o tabemasu." I'm going to eat sushi at 2. "Sushi o 2時にtabemasu" is also possible. Okay, you can put the "sushi o" first and the "niji ni" second if you want, although the other way is more common.
Niji.
Is that just more about?
Niji is 2 o'clock, and then the ni for the time particle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that just for more about like context?
Yeah, sometimes it's just context. In general, subjects and time phrases tend to be at the beginning of the sentence, other things in the middle, and verbs at the end. But there's a fair bit of flexibility because as long as the particle is paired correctly with the right word, you can still tell what it means because the particle is showing you what function it serves in the sentence. So as long as they're correctly paired up, you're fine. If you start swapping your particles around and putting them in the wrong places, then you get crazy sentences. You know, you could accidentally, you know, if you switch your particles wa and o, you could accidentally say that the sushi ate your grandmother. You know? So you do have to be careful. Okay, so we are out of time, but I will put a link to this presentation on Angel. It's going to be saved as a YouTube thing. So I will make sure that my YouTube channel has a link on your Angel page so that you guys can listen to this presentation again if you need to.